chứ đâu ai hỏi đâu không?
Lát hỏi vậy.
Nhớ nãy nó sao là anh Hoàng phải hỏi lại nha.
Since you
Không
have
cho đâu
something
qua.
to ask me, you don't
So-
have any question, so there are two options. First one, you know everything. So
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
give
not
you-
one thing.
enjoy this meeting. The second one, you try to say some point if you ask. So at least Hoàng has something to ask.
Yeah, cool. So my choice that for 1 and 2, I choose 1A and 2B A, but for 3 I use 3B. Why? So usually for the case 1 and 2, we have a repository or something, and we have ORM, and we have our database. That all the thing that we kind of have the full control with, right? Of course, we trust our ORM, and then so I tend to trust the function that we have the full code with it. So I choose 1A and 1B, but for the case for the 3, because we upload to a third-party provider, I don't have full control of it, so I kind of expect a result whether I want to know whether it's the success or not. So I choose 3B.
Question.
Okay.
So for 1A and 2A, you use exception to handle errors, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for 3B you use result, right?
Yeah.
So in your code base you have two different ways to handle errors, right?
Kind of, yeah.
So what about consistency? Consistency between code usage.
There's no such thing.
This is
Neighbor check.
Well, yeah, consistency is a thing, but it's kind of from two different things, right? Because I don't choose 2B or 1B or 2B because, for example, is if we get or update a user from a repository, what the chance we get in exception? Maybe you could argue that database go down, but I think it's just 0.1%, and it's not really worth that we always have to check for the result. Whereas in the 3A and 3B, because we upload to a third party, I really have no control over the third party, so I always expect a bad situation.
I think the first 1A makes no sense. Like when you get something, either you give it to me or you tell something is wrong. There's no return rule. It makes no sense. Like you go to your browser, enter an address. Doesn't exist. Just tell me 404. What the fucking noon?
Yes, no is a mistake of OB, right? But because we have first or before in EF, right? So this is just an example.
I think if you choose 1A when you apply for clean energy tax, it is very difficult to you notify for application layer now what happened in the database. That our application service, if you don't return any message or any information about the transaction or business.
In the let's see, in repository layer, maybe we already have some sort of login in there already.
Yeah, but the application layer want to know what happened when I send a request to process for me, and what is the seed or no, and reason for your end user.
So in 1A, if things go wrong, it throws an exception. We have the exception, right? We have something called a global exception middleware that handle
But
this
you
exception
can
for you.
but the handle the exception and none object. That
No.
specify
Anyway,
the
the way you.
Let's no. Okay, let me rephrase this. No in here means that the user does not exist in database, not really a database go down. But in case of if database go down, we have a result of false or fail. In case if we choose to use 1B, yeah, that's different cases.
Then should we use A or B?
I use A. It's just my opinion.
So should we have both yes and yes only for something?
Oh, so you mean that get that doesn't return?
Yes will call exception when not found.
Yeah.
That will
Yeah,
call
we
exception.
should. But this is just an example.
Cool.
Okay. So my choice is 1A, 2A, and 3B. Just my choice. You guys can
2A or 2B?
2A because 1 and 2 kind of the same.
Oh, let's agree that this is subjective.
Okay.
Leave it.
Yeah.
But I have a question.
When-
When we are using result something,
Uh-huh.
and then that method just throw an exception anyway, what happens?
That's
It could happen. Like a division by zero, whatever.
yeah.
Đúng rồi,
So-
Long trả lời đi.
Yeah, in this case we already have a global.
So that was the same problem.
Yeah, we.
If you want, you try that anyway.
Try catch anyway.
Anyway.
Not like
Anyway.
Try catch. Rồi,
Moving on.
rồi cuối cùng là sao?
Move on. Subjective. There you go.
Yeah. Don't listen to me.
Thấy không?
There's in programming. There's really no right or wrong. You just listen to your heart.
Qua đang học gì đây?
Your heart is wrong. I don't know.
Remember to cut exception.
Okay, moving on to persistent layer. We have ORMs. Because here I use MongoDB, and so I have MongoDB repository. We have EF Core application, DB context migration, and entity configuration. So question is why MongoDB plus the SQL Server? So in the left we have something called a cat theory. So basically, if you choose any of these database like Bigtable, SQL, or CouchDB, you only get 2 out of 3 properties, and by combining MongoDB plus the SQL Server, I want to get the not possible. But this just because I want to play with both MongoDB and SQL. So yeah. So the second question is that do we need a repository on unit of work for EF Core? The answer is no, because EF Core is already provide us a DB set and context of the say change already the repository and unit work pattern. And also EF Core has an in-memory provider, so that is fully testable. And just beware that if you use context directly, your test become integration test instead of unit test. But unless you have a very specific reason to do repository and unit work, like myself, so because I use both EF Core and MongoDB, in here I have 2 dependencies, have DB context and Mongo repository because I really don't want our application to be really aware of whether it's SQL or MongoDB. So I want to wrap it into a repository and take care of all of the business for communication with the database for me.
Didn't you just say that we don't need repository?
Yes,
So,
but
and now you
and
have
I
a
said in
repository.
the third point, unless you have a very specific reason to do so, you can.
It could turn out everything is specific to us.
Reason, what reason?
I have both SQL and MongoDB, and I don't want application to be aware of this database. So I draft this logic inside of a repository.
That same reason applies everywhere. Right?
What?
I mean, I don't want my application layer to know anything about a database, so I wrap everything in repository.
No. Because they have core why you would say DB set, and DB set it doesn't mean that it does not necessarily mean that you aware of the database.
I think link you on the set is the same with the database. Yeah.
No.
You're
You're
right,
wrong.
link
You're dead
you
wrong.
That's wrong, man.
See if and if, for example, if I do not use EF Core and I use only MongoDB driver, this is a case that I would create a repository. Why? Because MongoDB driver is very low detail, and I don't want to deal with that low level details, and so create a repository help me to encapsulate that low details, so I can only work with higher abstraction. That's one reason to implement repository. Okay. Let's move on to the infrastructure layer. Here I have another DB context called identity DB context. Why I have two DB contexts? Because I want to separate the identity from my application DB context, so that later I can swap out to a full identity server if I want. And in the infrastructure layer, we deal with all of the cross-cutting concerns like uploading photo using Cloudinary. So let me show you. The code. Oh shit! Okay.
Alright, alright.
Okay, no, bye guys.
Oh!
Language change.
Nói cái gì đây? Nói gì đây hòn? Hỏi chi thị nữa?
Yes.
Hỏi chi thị hả?
Hỏi với thầy nữa, nói gì đi.
So I have a Cloudinary adapter here for dealing with uploading to image to Cloudinary, and it's implement a image host. So in the application layer, we just have this interface here to work with. So the application really don't have to worry too much about Cloudinary.
Didn't you say in the beginning that we never change the service?
Never change.
Like changing database when you sit.
But I said that we could never change, but the word independent doesn't mean that we should we change. It means that this encourages us to do isolation and single responsibility. So let's move to the web layer. What do we have here? We have controllers, dependency injection, exception, middleware, and hosted server. And in .NET 3, we have this something called hosted service, which is for doing a long-running background task. So in my application, I use this for migration and shipping data. And we have here something called a presenter. Let me show you. So how many jobs do this controller have to do? So first is doing some sort of validation, and if the validation spit out error, we return back request. So it's kind of tend to have to do in 2 or 3 jobs. So the idea about presenter and output POC is based on the pattern called humble objects pattern. And basically we want a way that we can extract the output logic outside of our controller. So let me show you some of the code for presenter.
Đó nào
Idol 4.
Idol 4
Master
lên
4.
mạng thì anh có bỏ.
Đang quay nên đâu dám nói tiếng Việt đâu. Nên là cố phải
quay lại
Người cái
tư
vợ
liệu đồ,
báo cáo vậy.
phỏng vấn.
Thì ba. So
Sao gì vậy?
we,
Wait.
for example,
Where?
in case I imagine that this is a pull request. How many HTTP status code do a pull request usually return? We have 404, 201 for create a new one. If you put a new one, and 200 or 204 if we update existing one. So we have kind of multiple output for the and one action.
Access denied.
Yeah, could be. And the idea is that we have a presenter to deal with all of this output. So we check a result for create and we create appropriate output for each result instead of the controller have to do this job. And basically because the controller action is a little bit hard to unit test by split into this the presenter. This logic is very easy to test because we have if else here and yeah, it's testable. I didn't say that the controller is impossible to test, but it's just a bit hard to test.
So you write that logic for of the action in the
No,
controller.
no. All of the action, I think we should implement presenter only in case the controllers have multiple action result, for example. Not all of the actions we have, like
This have one disadvantage. If we use that approach, we cannot use Swagger. It can read the metadata and tell you what the data return.
yeah, no, you could. Yeah, you're right. You could place it in here, but this doesn't make much sense.
And by the way, if we using this approach clean architecture, we are testing the command and stuff, not the controller.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. So The idea of presenter is that the controller becomes so thin and humble that we don't even need to test. So here it's basically have no logic or whatsoever, so we can skip it, in my opinion.
In other words, controller is now presenter. It's just change the name.
No, the presenter is something else, not the controller anymore.
Presenter could be same with Sonic. The same contains the multi music. The same with different name. So Sonic means the presenter.
Presenter is,
Different between them.
yeah, by using presenter we want to deal with, for example, the output. For example, in this case we output to an action result, but you can also write a presenter to output, for example, HTML or something.
Sonic can do that.
Huh?
Sonic can do that.
Yes, so your service can do that also, but you see, your service is doing two things, right? First, it has to deal with the business rule, and then it has to output the HTML and some sort of action result. It's clearly doing two things, right? We don't want that. Xong rồi.
Thumbs up.
Okay, which parts of application should I test? Test everything. And in this application, I have a mock that basically mock a user manager, which is have a lot of no. So by looking at this, you really see that this user manager is doing too many things and violates single responsibility principle. And another trick that's I use internal visible tool. So let me show you. So for example, I have this adapter, but this is not public, this is just internal. But I do want to test it out. But if I'm not public, I have no way to test it until we use this magic trick. Okay, internal visible to, so it's gonna visible to a assembly name dot test. So we can test this the Cloudinary adapter.
Fine.
Questions?
Good.
Yes.
Block down for this session.
No, question.
Ticket.
Yeah.
Vietnam meeting. Okay, so credit go to Clean Architecture books and the guy.
Not Uncle Bob. He's
No.
not Uncle Bob.
No, this guy is not Uncle Bob. This guy
Yeah,
is.
so where is Uncle Bob?
This guy. SS.
That,
Yeah, Uncle Bob is there. But this the other guy, I think his name Jason or something.
Yeah, Jason from Australia, right?
Yeah. This have a really good structure for green architecture, and I reference a big place in his code.
Copy it.
Copy that.
Thank you.
have you referenced the topic of Thắng Chung on code project?
Yeah.
Have you referenced this topic on code project of Thắng Chung?
No, I know Thắng Chung, but I.
Yes, I saw it in the code project. It's very clear for this.
Yeah. Thank you. I got all.
Emoji.
Kimochi. Sao không hỏi gì hết Tina?
Ủa tao chưa hỏi nữa, cái kêu đi qua rồi. Hỏi
Chết
sao
đâu?
cái 3B 3A gì đó sao lại Phú lại thích xài cái result mà không xài cái kia?
Ủa nãy có nói mà. Chơi đâu?
Đó là yêu đủ.